Hello, this is our presentation on climate change and gender and sexuality differences in vulnerability, mental health, and activism. We'll be exploring how climate change affects different communities unequally and why these differences matter. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, but a social issue that affects people differently. Factors like gender and sexuality influence who is most vulnerable, who experiences mental health impacts, and who is able to engage in climate activism. Gender and sexuality shape how people experience climate change through social roles, access to support, and gender norms. For example, women and LGBTQ individuals may face higher risk during disasters due to caregiving roles, discrimination, or limited resources. Climate-related disasters affect millions of people worldwide each year. Research consistently shows increases in anxiety, depression, and trauma following these events, especially among populations that are socially or economically vulnerable. Indigenous and marginalized ethnic groups face greater risk from climate change due to location, poverty, and systematic marginalization. Communities in places like the Amazon, Arctic, and parts of Africa and South Asia experience threats to food, water, housing, and cultural survival, which increases stress, trauma, and loss of identity. Women and LGBTQ communities are disproportionately affected by climate change. Women often carry caregiving responsibilities and have less access to resources, which increases stress during disasters. Climate-related displacement also raises the risk of gender-based violence, compounding both physical and psychological harm. Research shows women report higher levels of climate-related anxiety, while LGBTQ individuals experience added minority stress that disasters can worsen. Intersectionality matters, as women of color and LGBTQ people in marginalized groups face greater risks, yet often lead efforts for resilience and social justice. Biological factors also shape how climate change affects health. Hormones like estrogen and cortisol influence stress responses, increasing anxiety and depression risks. Pregnant individuals are more vulnerable to extreme heat, and climate-related diseases can affect men and women differently due to immune system differences. Climate stress impacts health in unequal ways. Women's reproductive health is sensitive to heat and pollution, while climate stress worsens nutrition gaps in low-resource settings. Men may experience greater cardiovascular strain, while women report stronger mental health effects, showing how biology and environment interact. Climate change affects everyone, but not equally. Some groups experience climate change more intensely due to existing social stressors. Women and LGBTQ individuals already face discrimination, and climate disasters add uncertainty, fear, and long-term mental strain, making climate anxiety more severe for these communities. Climate change often worsens stress that people are already experiencing. Many individuals face unstable housing, low income, or limited social support. When climate disasters occur, these pre-existing challenges make recovery harder, as emotional pressure and social obstacles combine. A large study of women living in informal settlements in Nairobi found that those exposed to extreme weather, such as prolonged droughts and cold temperatures, reported significantly higher levels of anxiety and depression. These findings highlight how women's heightened concerns about temperature changes increase their powerlessness and helplessness to climate change than men. Climate disasters create fear, trauma, and long-term uncertainty. LGBTQ individuals may face discrimination or be denied shelter during emergencies, while women often take on increased caregiving roles. Even after the crisis ends, psychological trauma can continue for months or even years. Social roles strongly influence climate vulnerability. During emergencies, women's caregiving responsibilities often increase, adding stress and risk. LGBTQ individuals may lack family or community support. These social realities increase exposure to harm and limit access to resources during recovery. Intersection of age, gender, ethnicity, and sexuality influence how people perceive and respond to climate change, the overlapping social identities resulting in distinct experiences and level of concern. For example, A study shows that women from ethnic minority communities often face greater sensitivity since they have less access to resources, social capital, and opportunity to express themselves in household or community decision making. Additionally, sexuality and ethnicity intersect to shape climate concern and risk. Research shows that LGBTQ people from racial and ethnic minority groups face higher rates of disaster displacement, food and water insecurity, and unsafe living conditions. These overlapping disadvantages, such as discrimination and fewer resources, being left out of disaster response, demonstrates how overlapping identities increase their climate vulnerability. Reducing these gaps requires inclusive climate policies that address gender and sexuality differences, expanding access to mental health support, strengthening community resources, and involving marginalized voices in climate decision making can help reduce unequal vulnerability and improve long-term outcomes. One of the things we learned is that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is deeply connected to justice. Moreover, one of the interesting facts is a sociologist survey of US climate strike events found that about 68% of organizers and 58% of participants identified as female, and half of girls said climate change was extremely important, compared with about a quarter of boys. Climate change is not only environmental but social. Recognizing gender and sexuality differences helps us understand unequal impacts and the need for more inclusive and equitable solutions.